As I stepped onto the church steps on the day of my son Lucas's wedding, he raised his hand and stopped me in front of hundreds of people. "You're not invited. You're no longer my family." I froze, the whispers around me stabbing into my skin like tiny needles. But instead of crying, I smiled. I tilted my head and replied softly, "All right, sweetheart. But before I go, remember to check your phone." I turned away, and no one knew that what was inside his phone would destroy the entire wedding. And no one knew that I, a mother cast aside, had set a trap long ago. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I walked down the cold stone steps of St. Augustine Church, my hands trembling slightly because the Portland breeze in May still carried a chill. I heard the church door close behind me, the sound of its hinges slicing slowly into my heart. I forced my steps to stay steady, my back straight, my chin lifted as if nothing had happened. But every step was an open wound. People passing by looked at me with a mix of pity and curiosity, and all I wanted was to leave before everything collapsed in their eyes. I, Eleanor Harrington, 66 years old, never imagined the day would come when my only son rejected me at the threshold of one of the most important days of his life. I had spent half my lifetime raising and sacrificing for Lucas Harrington. From the moment he lay in that tiny newborn room, to the day I dropped him off at college, to the day he moved out to start his adult life, I was always there. I always stood behind him. Yet today, that very child pulled the string that held my heart together and let it fall to the ground. Inside the church, the ceremony continued without me. I could hear the choir through the thick brick walls. That melody was something I once thought I would hear with tears of joy in my eyes. Not like this. Not with a heart encased in the ice that Lucas himself had placed there. I stood beside my car with one hand on the roof, trying to steady the trembling in my body. Not from the cold, not from humiliation, but from the slow, dull agony of feeling a blunt knife carved through my chest. My son believed I was no longer his family, but deep inside, another emotion flickered. A small flame I had been tending for months. Determination, preparation, quiet resistance. I knew what was waiting to explode as soon as Lucas opened the phone tucked inside his vest pocket. I knew that moment would come, and I knew that when it did, his life and mine would split into two completely different paths. But before I tell you about that moment, I need to go back. I want you to understand where everything began, because no one in that church knew that once I had a family so happy it felt unbreakable until it shattered. It all began 3 years ago, during the last autumn when I was still able to hold my husband's hand, Richard Harrington. He was tall, warm, with eyes that always smiled when they looked at me. Our small house on the outskirts of Portland was never luxurious, but it was always filled with laughter, the smell of fresh apple pie, and the sound of Lucas dribbling a basketball in the driveway. When Richard received the diagnosis, late-stage pancreatic cancer, it felt like the air was torn from my lungs. He had 6 months for me to cook his favorite meals, 6 months for him to hold Lucas a little longer each time they said goodbye, 6 months to arrange everything he would never see once he was gone. I once thought the cruelest thing in my life was watching the man I loved fade a little more each day. But I was wrong. The cruelest thing was realizing that his death didn't just take my husband, it pulled apart the bond between me and my son. In his final days, Richard held my hand tightly, his voice weak but clear. "Eleanor, promise me something. Tell me, Richard. Keep our financial assets a secret until Lucas is truly mature enough to handle them. He has a good heart, but he's too easily influenced." I nodded, tears falling onto his hand. "It all belongs to him, but don't tell him early. Only when you believe he's strong enough, then you tell him." The assets Richard referred to weren't a few valuable items. They were his investment portfolios, the manufacturing company he co-founded compounded, and the savings he quietly built over 40 years of work. Richard wanted Lucas to be responsible before learning the truth. I promised, and I kept my word. Richard passed on a cold October morning. Lucas cried like a 5-year-old child, even though he was 29 at the time. I held my son close, hurting for him and for myself. I thought that after Richard's death, Lucas and I would become closer, but life doesn't follow our hopes. A year after Richard passed, Lucas began to find his footing again. I stayed by his side, cooking breakfast whenever he stopped by, helping him fix up his new apartment, listening to him talk about his job. I believed we were building a new kind of happiness, quieter, steadier. Then one day, Lucas came to my house with a young woman. Her name was Vanessa Hale. I remember that moment vividly, the moment my life took a sudden turn. Vanessa walked into my home as if she were stepping into a place she expected to own one day. Her dress hugged her body, her heels clicked sharply, and her eyes swept across the room as if she were appraising everything in sight. When Lucas introduced us, Vanessa smiled beautifully, but the smile never reached her eyes. It was the kind of smile I had seen many times in my life, a smile from someone who always wanted more than what they had. I was never a suspicious person. I had always believed in people's goodness, but from the very first day, Vanessa unsettled me. The way she asked about Richard's career, about the factory, about our savings, everything was too subtle to be accidental. Lucas, on the other hand, adored her. She seemed like the first light he'd seen since his father's passing. He laughed more, stood taller, worked harder. Love brought him back to life, but it also blinded him. I wanted to be happy for him. I wanted to believe Vanessa loved him sincerely, but every sly comment, every probing glance, every time she reached into parts of my home she didn't belong, made me uneasy. None of us want to admit that someone might approach our child for reasons other than love, but a mother's intuition, especially a mother my age, is rarely wrong. I didn't yet know that the day Lucas brought Vanessa into my home was the day I began losing my son, slowly, quietly, piece by piece. But that is the story of the chapters that follow. For now, standing outside the church with the fading afternoon stretched beneath my feet, I understood one thing. The moment Lucas stopped me at the doors was not the first time I lost him. The first time was the day he brought Vanessa Hale into our home. From the day Lucas brought Vanessa into my house, the air inside every room seemed to change. Gone was the peaceful quiet of a woman living alone, and gone was the lingering warmth of my old family life. Something colder slipped in, like a breeze carrying the scent of a coming storm, and it walked into my house with Vanessa Hale's confident smile. Lucas stood behind her with a brightness in his eyes I hadn't seen since Richard died. It made me want to be happy, to believe this woman would heal him. But when Vanessa reached out to shake my hand, her hand soft and warm, her eyes were cold as a blade pressed to the throat. "I've heard you're a wonderful cook," she said sweetly. "Lucas tells me so much." I smiled politely, thanked her, but I noticed her gaze never stayed on my face. It moved to the wedding portrait of Richard and me, the antique clock Richard adored, the crystal glass set we bought in Europe decades ago. Her eyes weren't observing, they were assessing. At 66, I had met many types of people. I knew instantly that the look in Vanessa's eyes wasn't that of a woman in love. It was the look of someone calculating. Lucas didn't see it. He never would. During dinner, Vanessa sat across from me, legs crossed, shoulders tilted as if she were at an interview, but not the interviewee. No, she was evaluating me. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. "More than 30 years. I answered. "This home was built with so much of my husband's effort." "Ah," Vanessa murmured, her eyes sweeping again. "It's beautiful. Portland is such a great place for real estate investment." Her tone tightened something inside my chest, not because of the words, but because of the voice. It belonged to someone who knew the value of everything in a home she hadn't lived in for even a day. Lucas was too busy smiling, telling stories. He didn't see that Vanessa paid attention only when the topic was money, property, or investments. I wanted to believe my instincts were wrong. I wanted to give her a chance. That changed the night she went down the hallway after dinner. I heard the faint click of a drawer, Richard's filing cabinet. He kept all his business documents there, stock papers, investment accounts, factory contracts. He always locked it. After he died, I continued locking it. That night, I forgot. When I heard the sound, my heart dropped. "Vanessa," I called. "Yes, I was just looking for the bathroom," she answered. She appeared at the corner in 2 seconds, too fast to convince me she had actually been searching for anything except what was inside that cabinet. Her eyes looked innocent, but I didn't buy it. "The bathroom is this way," I said with a smile, pointing in the opposite direction. "Oh, my mistake. Thank you," she said, placing a hand dramatically on her chest. Too dramatic. Too perfect. I glanced at the cabinet after she left. The third drawer was slightly ajar, just enough for someone to peek inside. It felt like someone had laid a filthy hand on my heart. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa slipped deeper into Lucas's life, and Lucas, my sweet, grieving, vulnerable son, fell deeper under her spell. He stopped visiting me. He stopped calling unless she needed something. He stopped seeing me as his home. One evening, as I brewed tea in the kitchen, I heard the cabinet again. I stepped into the hallway and found Vanessa standing there, her hand still on the drawer. "Oh, you scared me," she said, laughing lightly. "I thought Lucas left his jacket here." No one keeps jackets in a file cabinet. I looked at her long enough for her to sense the suspicion radiating off me. She only smiled, and in that smile I saw it clearly. She wasn't lost. She wasn't confused. She was looking, and she had found the folder marked with the logo of Richard Harrington's factory. I could tell by the position of the papers shifted from where I last left them. She turned away, but I stood frozen. Why did she care about those documents? Why did she always appear when my guard was lowest? Why did her eyes brighten only when Lucas spoke about Richard's success? I didn't have proof, only a heaviness in my chest that grew by the day. A mother's instinct, a woman's instinct, the instinct of someone who had lived long enough to recognize greed when it walked straight through her door. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. Vanessa Hale did not come for Lucas's heart, and I knew something else too. I had never feared another woman's smile the way I feared hers. It was the smile of a gathering storm, and that storm drew closer every day. I still remember clearly the afternoon Lucas came into my house with a brightness in his eyes I hadn't seen for a long time. Not the brightness of a man who is steady and happy. It was the brightness of a boy who has just been reassured that every dream can be bought if he tries a little harder. Lucas sat down in the chair across from me, his hands clenched, his voice trembling despite his attempt to steady it. "Mom, I proposed to Vanessa." Time seemed to stop for a few seconds. 3 months. Only 3 months. From the day Vanessa appeared in his life, I had been losing my son, little by little. But hearing he had proposed felt like someone had just pulled the rug out from under me, leaving me swaying without warning. I looked at my son. I wanted to ask a dozen questions. "Have you thought this through? Do you understand what you're doing? Do you see what I see?" But I also understood that one wrong word, one tone he didn't like, could make me lose my only child forever. "I'm happy for you," I whispered, even as my heart tightened in pain. "As long as you're happy." Lucas smiled faintly, but the smile faded quickly, as if he was about to say something that even he wasn't comfortable with. "Vanessa wants a big wedding, a really big one," Lucas said quietly. "She says it's the most important day of my life." Right away, I knew where this was going. Vanessa hopes you can help cover part of the cost, just to make the ceremony perfect." I kept my composure. "Lucas, how much are we talking about?" He swallowed. "About $28,000. $28,000. The number dropped between us like a heavy stone. I knew my family had resources, but I had lived frugally and privately for years. What Richard left behind was not something I handed out to buy anyone's approval, but Lucas's eyes at that moment, both pleading and anxious, made it impossible for me to refuse. He was torn between me and Vanessa, and clearly Vanessa knew exactly how to make him feel guilty if he didn't provide for her. "Of course, I'll help," I said, and so I transferred the money, not because I wanted a lavish ceremony, but because I was afraid of losing more of my son. I thought that was it. I thought I had paid for a bit of fragile peace, but people like Vanessa don't know what enough means. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed close to 9 p.m. A message from Vanessa. "Ms. Eleanor, we need to talk. There are some important additional costs. Could we speak?" I sighed but called her back. She answered immediately. "Ms. Harrington," Vanessa said with a gentle laugh, her voice sweeter than honey. "I'm really grateful for your support, but I just reviewed things with the event coordinator and the price has increased. I need another $20,000 to keep everything as planned." I tightened my grip on the table. "Another $20,000? Vanessa, that's a lot of money." "Oh, I understand." Her tone instantly shifted to something sympathetic. "But Lucas really wants everything perfect, and I don't want him to be disappointed. No mother would want her son upset on his big day, right?" That sentence was a knife, small but sharp enough to make me close my eyes. I heard the calculation in every syllable, not a hint of hesitation, not a drop of shame. "Let me think," I said. "Yes, of course, take your time," Vanessa replied, then added one last line. "But the vendor only holds the reservation until tomorrow morning. If we lose it, we'll have to downgrade, and you know Lucas wouldn't want that." I understood clearly. That wasn't information. It was a threat wrapped in time pressure. After the call ended, I sat for a long time without moving. I looked at Richard's photo on the shelf. He was smiling gently as always, but I could almost hear him ask, "What are you doing, Eleanor? Who are you letting steer your life?" But I still transferred another $20,000 for Lucas. Only for Lucas. After that day, Vanessa's invisible power over my son became unmistakable. Lucas no longer made decisions on his own. Every answer, every opinion seemed filtered through Vanessa's expression, her glance before he spoke. If I asked Lucas something simple like, "Are you sure?" he immediately stiffened, looking toward Vanessa like a child afraid of getting something wrong. "Mom, Vanessa thinks this makes more sense," he said with an awkward smile. Vanessa didn't need to say much. A hand on Lucas's shoulder or a faint smile from her was enough for my son to take her side instantly. I began to see the changes clearly, not sudden but layered, thin as frost accumulating after a long night. Lucas grew more defensive, more irritable, and began treating my concerns as interrogations. I knew I was losing him, piece by piece, and I also knew I couldn't keep ignoring it. From the night Vanessa demanded another $20,000, I began recording everything: dates, amounts, reasons, contacts, receipts she sent, even her voice messages. I didn't know exactly what I was preparing for, but instinct told me that someday I would need all of this, not to protect myself, but to save my son from the woman he believed was the love of his life. On the quiet nights in my big, empty house, I sat at the kitchen table organizing every invoice. Sometimes my breath trembled with anger and helplessness. I had lived long enough to recognize what being used felt like, and every piece of Vanessa, her eyes, her smile, her voice, made that feeling stronger by the day. Sometimes I wondered whether I was judging too harshly. Maybe Vanessa was simply a young woman who liked luxury. But each time I saw her, the truth rose to the surface like white foam on water. She didn't love Lucas. She loved what Lucas could offer her. But what hurt me most was that Lucas didn't see it. My son, the child I held in my arms, the boy I comforted when he feared the dark, the young man I embraced when Richard died, was being led by someone who had no good intentions whatsoever. One evening, while I sat at the dining table looking at yet another invoice Vanessa sent, a thought crossed my mind. Maybe this was just the beginning, just the first door in a long corridor Vanessa had planned from the start. I set the paper down and closed my eyes. I knew, deep in my heart, that the thing I feared most had not yet arrived. And indeed, I had no idea that what I had just endured was only the opening act of a far more intricate scheme, one that would pull both me and my son into a storm we would never forget. After I transferred that additional $20,000, things between Lucas and me changed noticeably, but not in the way I once hoped. The mother and son closeness that had been natural and warm began to feel strained, careful, as if an unseen third person stood behind every conversation, pulling strings, and I knew who that person was. Lucas visited far less often, from coming every weekend to once every 2 weeks, then once a month, then so rarely that I had to mentally count how long it had been since we last ate together. I wanted to ask, to reach out, to draw him back in, but each time I opened my mouth, I heard Vanessa's voice in my head, sweet but sharp as a needle. What mother would bother her son when he's building his future? And so I stayed silent. One Saturday afternoon, I called Lucas to ask if he wanted to come for dinner. I had made rosemary roasted chicken, his favorite since childhood. Lucas answered, but his voice sounded distant, as if filtered through something cold. "Mom, Vanessa isn't feeling well tonight. I think I should stay home with her." "Vanessa isn't well? Then let me stop by." "No need, Mom," Lucas cut in quickly. "Vanessa doesn't want anyone over when she's resting. You understand?" No, I didn't understand, but I still said, "All right, maybe another day." I set the phone down and looked at the roasted chicken steaming on the counter, the meal I had made for him so many times. The dish he once said was the best thing I cooked. Now it was just a tray of food for one, someone being slowly pushed out of her son's life. Other times weren't any better. Lucas canceled plans, or showed up late, or left early because Vanessa needed him. I started seeing the pattern clearly. Every time Lucas tried to spend time with me, Vanessa suddenly had an urgent matter. One evening, I tried stopping by their place. I didn't want to intrude. I just wanted to see if Lucas was okay. Vanessa opened the door with a flawless face of makeup and eyes that were ice cold. "Miss Eleanor," she said slowly, "you came without letting us know. I wanted to bring Lucas some fresh-baked bread." "Yes, but you understand, don't you? Newlyweds need private time." She said it with a smile, but the coldness was unmistakable. "I can come in for just a minute." "It's really not a good time," Vanessa insisted, cutting me off. "Next time, just message first. We're very busy." Message first to enter my son's home? I stood there for a few seconds, gripping the tray tightly to keep calm. The door closed the moment I stepped back, like I was a stranger who had knocked on the wrong house. Walking down the stairs, my throat tightened. The bread in the tray was still warm, but my heart felt frozen. Another day, I learned something that still stings even now. A neighbor's daughter accidentally sent me a screenshot from Instagram stories, a small family gathering at Lucas and Vanessa's home. I saw Lucas, Vanessa, her mother, her relatives, everyone smiling, toasting, and in the corner, the group chat name appeared. Hale Family Circle, the Hale family. I zoomed in. There were 30 unread messages, and at the top was a small line of text. A Lucas Harrington added by Vanessa, their family, and me, I, the woman who raised Lucas from infancy, who held his hand on his first day of school, who comforted him when Richard died, wasn't included in his life online or offline, not added, not mentioned, erased. I began noticing that the phrases Lucas used weren't his own. "I need to focus on my new family, Mom. Vanessa says I need to prioritize correctly. I can't keep working around your schedule. A wife is who I should take care of first." I sat across from him as he said these things. I watched the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, just for a second before his shoulders stiffened, as if he needed to prove something. I knew those words weren't from my son's heart. They were Vanessa's echoes, her subtle, steady control wrapping around Lucas like a trap. One October evening, I sat in my living room with my phone in hand, waiting for a birthday message from Lucas. No call, no gift, just a few words. That was all I wanted. 10 p.m., 10:15, 11. At 11:48, the screen lit up. "Happy birthday, Mom." Nothing more. No emoji, no sign-off, no call. Just 3 cold words. 3 words typed by someone who felt like a stranger. I set the phone down and felt a hollow ache in my chest. In my 66 years, I don't think I had ever felt so alone. Not because no one was beside me, but because the only person I had left was drifting beyond my reach, and I couldn't pull him back. That night, I cried for the first time in months, not because I was insulted, but because I realized I had been pushed to the outer edge of my son's life in small, soft, but merciless steps. Vanessa didn't want me to lose Lucas all at once. She wanted me to lose him slowly, quietly, without a trace. But tears also have limits. When a heart no longer has room for pain, patience turns into vigilance, and vigilance, when pushed far enough, turns into determination. I no longer saw Vanessa as simply the woman Lucas loved. I began to see her as someone trying to build an invisible prison around my son and tightening it one ring at a time. I knew I couldn't just stand by and watch, but I didn't know where to start until that night when the house was quiet. I was washing my teacup when my phone vibrated. A message from Vanessa sent directly to me the first time in weeks. I dried my hands and opened it. Only 7 words, but those 7 words sent a chill down my spine, as if someone had thrown open a window and let a storm crash into the room. "We need to talk about your house." I froze in the kitchen, and at that very moment, I fully woke up. There was no doubt left. Vanessa didn't just want to control Lucas. She wanted to take everything Lucas could inherit, everything Richard left to me, and her next step would certainly be me. I set the phone on the table. A flame rose inside me. No more tears. No more waiting. No more telling myself, this will pass. I knew the storm had truly begun, and I also knew this time I was no longer afraid. When I read the message Vanessa sent the night before, I knew she wouldn't stop, but I didn't expect the next blow to come so quickly and so ruthlessly that my entire body went cold, like someone had poured a basin of ice water straight into my chest. The next morning, Lucas called me. His voice was excited, trembling, like a child who had just received a scholarship, not a grown man standing at the edge of a storm about to tear his life apart. "Mom, Vanessa has good news." Good news. Those 2 words fell into my ears like lead. She is pregnant. I froze. One hand still held a dish towel, the other gripping the phone so tightly the knuckles turned white. Vanessa, pregnant. I couldn't breathe for a few seconds. Not because I was afraid of having a grandchild. I had hoped for one for a long time, but with everything I had seen in Vanessa, her calculating eyes, her subtle control, her sweet words dripping poison one drop at a time, and the web she was spinning around Lucas, I knew instantly this wasn't a miracle. It was a strategy, a chess piece placed in the perfect square. Lucas continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom, God, I'm gonna be a dad." I swallowed hard. "Congratulations, sweetheart." "Mom, we're coming over tonight. There's something important we want to discuss." Something important. I knew for certain it wouldn't be about baby names. That evening, when the doorbell rang, I had prepared myself, but I didn't expect Vanessa to show up with one hand on her stomach, a stomach that looked exactly the same as a week earlier, and a triumphant smile like she had just reached the final step of her plan. "Miss Eleanor," Vanessa said, her voice filled with deliberate sweetness. "You're going to be a grandmother." Lucas stood beside her, his eyes glowing, as if nothing in the world could compare to that moment. I invited them in. Vanessa didn't wait. She walked straight into the living room as if it had been her house all along. She stroked her stomach again and again, a weak but overly performed gesture, like an amateur actress forcing herself into character. After a few polite questions, Vanessa glanced at Lucas and nodded slightly. A signal. Lucas took a folder out of his bag. He placed it on the table and slid it toward me. "Mom, we've thought this through, about where the baby will live." Vanessa cut in immediately, her voice soft but her eyes sharp as a knife scraping across the table. "Our 1-bedroom apartment isn't suitable. We're really worried." I didn't say anything. I didn't touch the papers either. Lucas continued. "So, Vanessa suggested a good idea for the whole family." Family. Why did that word sound like an accusation when it came out of his mouth? "Miss Eleanor." Vanessa tilted her head, smiling soft as cotton but with eyes cold as steel. "Your house is too big. You live alone. It's wasteful and tiring. You're getting older." I tightened my hands on my lap. "At this stage of life, you should be resting, not cleaning a whole big house." I still stayed silent, and then she placed the real statement on the table like a stone dropped into a still lake. "So we think you should transfer the ownership of this house to Lucas." No more hints, no more polite wording, just cold bluntness so shocking I doubted my own hearing. Lucas took a deep breath as if he were doing something noble. "For me, for the baby, Mom." Vanessa pushed the stack of papers closer to me with one elegant, commanding finger. "You just need to sign here. We prepared all the paperwork." I flipped through the documents quickly, not in detail, but enough to see the horror. No protection for me, no right to stay, no right to use the house, nothing. If I signed, the house would belong entirely to Lucas. And Vanessa, I knew for certain, would want me out the moment it suited her. Lucas looked at me, and the eyes weren't my son's anymore. They were the eyes of someone trapped in a tunnel, believing he had only one way out. Mom, don't you want to help us? Lucas, I said softly, have you really thought this through? Vanessa let out a small laugh, a pitying laugh, firm as a slap. Ms. Eleanor, don't be selfish. You're old and living in a big house like this. For what? Meanwhile, your son and your future grandchild have to squeeze into a tiny apartment? I looked directly at Vanessa, this time without avoiding. If you truly cared about the baby, you'd want stability, not someone else's property. Vanessa's expression darkened, shifting into something colder. I don't see this as someone else's property. This is a family home, and Lucas is your family, isn't he? I smiled, a smile full of pain but without tears. Family doesn't take from each other. Lucas frowned. Mom, what is that supposed to mean? Vanessa only wants what's best for me and the baby. The baby. He was talking about a child I was certain Vanessa was not carrying. I clenched my hands, then said each word clearly. I will not sign. The living room turned cold as a cellar. Vanessa leaned back, arms crossed, eyes narrowing at me as if assessing an opponent. Then you're only making things harder for Lucas. She turned to Lucas, her voice trembling for exactly one perfect beat. Sweetheart, if your mother doesn't care about our family, then I don't know how our baby will live. Lucas immediately panicked, eyes reddening. Vanessa, don't cry. Mom, can't you see we need you? No, I saw everything clearly. I saw Vanessa squeezing Lucas's wrist under the table, lightly but with the force of command. I saw the fear in my son's eyes, not fear of me, but fear of losing Vanessa. I saw that I was facing a plan months in the making, pushing me step by step into surrender. And I saw one painful truth. Lucas was no longer on my side. I inhaled deeply, then stood up. You two should go home. Vanessa shot to her feet, her gaze slicing across me with open hostility, then dragged Lucas toward the door as if pulling a possession behind her. Just before disappearing, Lucas turned back. Mom, why can't you try to understand us? The door slammed shut. I stood still for a long time. Only one thought echoed in my mind. They had planned this for a very long time. From the moment Vanessa first stepped into my home, her eyes scanning the file cabinet, from the moment she began isolating Lucas from me, from the moment she demanded the absurd wedding expenses, and now, right in the middle of my living room, she dared call me selfish in the house my husband left to me. I wasn't trembling anymore. I wasn't hurting anymore. I had only one thing left. The will to survive. I walked straight to my office. My hand trembled slightly as I opened my contacts. I dialed the number I had saved for years, never imagining I'd call it because of my own son. The phone rang once. A deep, familiar voice answered. Grant Smith speaking. I closed my eyes, taking a long breath. Grant, I need you, please, immediately. And that was the moment I officially stepped into the battle Vanessa thought I would lose from the very first move. But she didn't know one thing. I raised Lucas for more than 30 years. I lived beside Richard, a man of formidable strength, all my life. I was never an easy target, and Vanessa would soon learn that. I had never experienced a morning so long and dense as that one. After speaking with Grant Smith the night before, I hardly slept. I sat in the living room, the curtain shifting slightly with Portland's early winter breeze, my hands gripping a cup of tea that had gone cold without me noticing. My mind kept turning, not from fear, but from a painful clarity. I was dealing with a woman who had no limits, no morals, and no intention of stopping once she chose her target. Around 10 in the morning, the doorbell rang. Grant's investigator, Mr. Walter Briggs, a tall man with deep-set eyes and a warm but sharp voice, stood at my door holding a black document case. Mrs. Harrington, he said with a small nod, we've gathered the information you requested. I invited him into the dining room. He placed the case on the table and slid it toward me like one would present crucial evidence in a boardroom. I need you to brace yourself, Briggs said. What we found isn't pleasant. I drew a breath. I expected that. But I don't think I had ever expected something so painfully accurate. When he opened the case, the documents were organized by category: finances, relationships, legal history, personal background. I recognized immediately the meticulousness of Briggs's work. No excess detail, no irrelevant line, and the very first line made my blood run cold. Legal name: Vanessa Hale. Influencer profile fabricated. Briggs pushed a stack of color-printed photos toward me. The photos Vanessa posted online: luxury homes, expensive cars, vacations, designer brands, all glamorous on the surface, but he pointed to each one. All of these locations were shot in staged rental units and hourly photo studios, he explained. Most of the handbags and jewelry are rentals. None of it belongs to her. I had suspected it, but I didn't think it would be this empty. Briggs continued. She owes about $95,000 in credit card debt and high-interest private loans. Here's the summary. A long sheet of paper, numbers in bright red, packed with debts from banks, credit companies, and worst of all, 3 loans from private lenders with interest rates bordering on extortion. How can she maintain such a luxurious lifestyle? I asked. Because she doesn't, Briggs replied. She only creates the illusion. He opened the next section. Romantic relationships, affair with a gym trainer. I looked at a photo captured from the gym's camera. Vanessa walking arm in arm with a man at least 5 years younger, far more intimate than casual friends. Then pictures of them entering a hotel. The dates matched the time she began dating Lucas. I felt my heart being squeezed hard, not because I was hurt on Lucas's behalf, but because I could see my son was simply one of her financial options to cling to. Briggs pulled out another set of documents. And this is the most important information, he said slowly. Vanessa once faked a pregnancy to extort money from a businessman in Seattle. When the truth came out, she disappeared before the man could sue. I stared at him without blinking. Fake pregnancy, Briggs emphasized. She has done it before, and she might be doing it again. Not might. I knew for certain. Vanessa was never pregnant. Next, Briggs opened the section labeled Psychological Manipulation. Do you remember those arguments that seemed to happen by chance between you and Lucas? He asked. I nodded. They've been happening more often lately. Not by chance, Briggs said. We found messages Vanessa sent to Lucas. She fed him all kinds of ideas. That you were discouraging him, that you were selfish, that you were jealous of his new life. I closed my eyes. Each sentence was a blade reopening wounds that had never healed. She told Lucas, Briggs continued, if your mother doesn't support us, that means she doesn't want our family to be happy. I felt my hands tremble, but I set them on the table to steady myself. I knew I had been pushed away from my son, but learning it was a deliberate plan, made it all even more painful. Briggs flipped to the final page, and here is her actual plan. I read the first line and almost couldn't breathe. Objective: seize ownership of assets by declaring Mrs. Harrington legally incompetent. Briggs explained. She has connections with someone working at a legal consulting office. They are trying to build preliminary documentation, claiming you are forgetful, no longer fully aware, and unfit to manage your own assets. I let out a dry laugh. Incredible, I whispered. She wants to have me declared incompetent? Yes. And once that happens, Lucas, the legal husband, would be appointed to manage all assets, including the house. She would control everything indirectly. I collapsed back in my chair. 30 years of marriage with Richard. All the keepsakes, all the hard work, all the memories. Vanessa wanted to take everything with one signature and a fabricated file. I inhaled deeply and steadied my voice. Briggs, I need to know every piece of evidence you gathered. It's all here, he said, sliding the folder toward me. Messages, emails, audio recordings, debt papers, photos. We even have video of Vanessa meeting the gym trainer at the same time she told Lucas she was going to a prenatal appointment. Exactly as I suspected, the storm had grown into a full-blown hurricane. But for the first time, I felt I wasn't standing alone in the wind. I had evidence. I had a lawyer. And most importantly, I had the truth on my side. That evening, I sat alone in my office, the desk lamp casting light over the pages spread out before me. I reviewed every piece of evidence, carefully taking notes in a small notebook, a habit Richard had taught me when he managed the factory. Nothing is stronger than a well-organized file. I opened my laptop and created 3 copies of everything, one on the computer, one on an external drive, and one stored in the cloud with 2-step authentication. I did not allow myself a single mistake, not one. While taping together the last set of documents, my phone rang. It was Grant Smith. Eleanor, his voice calm but serious. Briggs told me everything. You must be extremely careful. Vanessa is clever in a dangerous way. Your strike must land at the right time, in the right place. Otherwise, she will flip the situation. I know, I said, but I'm ready. There's something important, Grant added. If you want to break Vanessa's plan, Lucas must see the truth with his own eyes. Someone like Lucas, he doesn't believe stories. He believes what he hears and sees directly. I stayed silent for a few seconds. Then a thought flashed through my mind, sharp as a blade. The phone, Lucas's phone, every call, every message, every whisper she breathed into his ear, every argument they thought I never noticed, every lie. If I could access it, if I could show Lucas exactly what Vanessa said about him, about me, about the assets, it would be a blow she could not defend against. I looked up, my voice calm enough to surprise even myself. Grant, I said, I know what I have to do. Are you sure? I'll use Lucas's phone, I replied, and I'll let Vanessa reveal the truth herself. I closed my laptop. The Portland night was pounding rain against the window, each drop like a drum urging me forward. I was no longer the mother pushed to the margins. I was the survivor, the one preparing to strike back, and Vanessa Hale would never see it coming. I never thought there would come a day when my own son, the child I held, raised, comforted for more than 30 years, would block me the way someone blocks a nuisance caller. But he did, without warning, without hesitation. The morning after I refused to sign the house transfer, Lucas disappeared from my life in the literal sense. When I called to ask if he had calmed down, a cold, automated voice answered, "The number you have dialed is not reachable." I tried texting. 2 hours later, the message failed to deliver. I checked social media, Messenger, Instagram, even Facebook, and then I saw the most painful sentence a mother can read. "You can't message this user." I had been blocked completely. No door left to reach my son. I sat silently in the living room, listening to the wall clock click forward, each beat like a countdown of my relevance in Lucas's life, and each one tightening my chest. I had braced myself for Vanessa to keep attacking, to keep lying, to keep poisoning Lucas's mind, but I never imagined she could push him to erase every line of contact with me in a single night. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I sent a small gift for the baby in Vanessa's belly, a knitted blanket I made myself, the same pattern I once used for Lucas when he was little. I knew Vanessa wasn't pregnant, but Lucas believed she was, and I wanted my son to know I still loved him, no matter what side he stood on. 3 days later, the package came back, written across the box in marker, "Return to sender." I stood over the box like a ghost. My hands shook so badly I couldn't lift the lid. Something inside me fell into a deep, empty pit. Not anger, not embarrassment. It was the feeling of being erased from my son's life with a gesture as simple as a scribble. That night, I turned on the kitchen light, made a cup of peppermint tea, and sat down as I had every evening since Richard passed. But that night, the tea didn't smell fragrant. It tasted bitter, very bitter. By the 3rd week, I created a hidden account using a false name and a default profile picture. I never thought I would be pushed to the point of watching my son from the shadows like this. But if he wouldn't let me enter his life through the front door, I had no choice but to look through the cracks. I searched for Vanessa first, and it took me less than a minute. Her page was updated constantly. Colorful photos, bright smiles, captions about happiness, family, preparing for motherhood. Hundreds of comments under each post praising her. Strangers saw her as an angel ready to become a mother. I watched each picture, each video. In a 15-second clip, Vanessa placed her hand on her belly and gently turned, smiling softly, a smile I knew very well was nothing more than performance. No slight skin stretch, no change in posture, no heavier breathing, no signs of pregnancy. But the clip was flooded with congratulatory comments. And then I saw the post that made my heart ache so sharply I had to grip the table to stay standing. Our baby shower, a lavish party, giant floral arches, multi-layered cake, piles of gifts, gold and pink balloons. In the photos were Vanessa's family, Vanessa's friends, a few of Lucas's co-workers, but not me. Not a single trace suggesting I ever existed in that world. I stared at the picture for a long, long time. Everyone in it was smiling. Vanessa stood in the center, hand on her perfectly flat stomach, eyes sparkling as if she were living a perfect life, while I, the mother of the man about to become a father, was erased from everything simply because I stood between her and the assets my husband left behind. Every day after that was another knife, not because I was hated, but because I was forgotten. I asked myself over and over, so many times the question itself frightened me. If I died right now, would Lucas even know? One night, I walked into my bedroom, turned on the lamp, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared into nothing. At 66, I had lost my husband, lost the family I had known for decades, and now I was close to losing my only child. People say loneliness is being in a crowded room and still feeling empty. But for me, loneliness was looking at my phone and knowing for certain it would not light up with Lucas's name. And then I remembered something Richard once said in his final years when he watched me take care of everything, even when my back ached and my eyes were tired. Eleanor, love isn't something you endure forever. It has to be protected, and sometimes it has to be released to save yourself. His words echoed as gently as breath, yet strong enough to pull me out of the dark. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't cry. I stood up, turned on the office light, opened the file Briggs gave me, and began sorting every piece of evidence into categories: finances, fraud, infidelity, manipulation, fake pregnancy, attempted asset seizure. I wrote clear titles for each section, numbered everything, added notes. Each page I placed on the table was a blade turned back, sharper, more precise. Each file I backed up was a brick in the wall I was building to protect myself. Each piece of evidence I highlighted was a reminder I was not defeated. I gathered everything into a counterattack file, almost as thick as my wedding album. But unlike that album, this one held no memories. It held truth strong enough to sway any court. When I closed the file, it was midnight. The desk lamp made the pages glow like a lantern. I laid my hand on the cover, feeling a confidence I hadn't felt in months. Just as I reached to turn off the light and head to bed, my phone vibrated. A phone call at 12:17 a.m. The screen showed only one name, Lucas. I held my breath, and just like that, after 6 months of being erased, my son was calling me in the middle of the night. The late-night call made my heart skip a beat. I stared at Lucas's name pulsing on the screen, my hands trembling slightly as if touching it might shatter everything. 6 months without a single word from him. 6 months hearing his voice only through Vanessa's videos. 6 months of being turned into a ghost. I answered, "Mom." Lucas's voice was small, unsteady, but not with emotion. It sounded like someone reading lines they had been told to recite. Vanessa said, "You can come to the wedding." I can. Not that he wants me there. Vanessa allows it. I heard every layer of meaning buried beneath that sentence. I didn't respond right away. I looked out the window, the thin snow over the neighbor's roof, the streetlight casting a pale gold glow across the glass. The whole world seemed silent, as if listening to this conversation. "What time is the wedding?" I asked. 1:30, but you should come early. Vanessa wants to test the seating arrangement. I closed my eyes. My seat, a decorative prop. Nothing more. "All right," I said, "I'll come." Lucas exhaled in relief so clearly I could hear it through the phone. "Thank you, Mom. Vanessa will be happy." Vanessa, not Lucas. The call ended, leaving behind a hollow space inside me, dark but also sharp, like a blade forming its edge. I knew the only reason they invited me, to make Vanessa's family look good, to have photos of the bride and groom beside the forgiven mother, to use me as a backdrop for their staged perfection. I set the phone on the table, and I smiled, a small smile without joy, only the clarity of someone who had finally seen the whole game. If they thought I would come to bow my head, they would soon learn I was going there to finish this. The next morning, I met with Grant Smith again. He sat in his darkwood office, fingers interlaced, eyes studying me as if wanting to confirm my resolve one last time. Eleanor, you understand that after this strike, nothing will ever go back to the way it was, right? I don't want things to go back, I replied. I want the truth to speak. Grant nodded, then called someone in. A middle-aged man entered, chalk dust on his jacket, a magnifying loupe hanging around his neck, the technician Grant had mentioned. This is Mr. Cal, Grant said. Professional, absolutely discreet. Mr. Cal set his laptop on the table. You want access to your son's iCloud? His voice was low, steady. I nodded. I need whatever Vanessa has said to Lucas, and I need to send something for him to see right at the wedding. Mr. Cal got to work immediately, fingers moving so fast across the keyboard I couldn't keep up. I gave him everything I knew, Lucas's birthday, old passwords, security questions. He tried possibility after possibility with patient precision. After just 12 minutes, he looked up, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. We're in. My heart dropped a beat. Part of me wanted this to succeed. Another part feared facing the truth head on. Messages, photos, notes, voice memos, location history. All of it appeared before us. Mr. Cal filtered through the keywords Grant requested. Pregnancy, money, moms, a property, cells, a plan, doctor, he fake. One conversation after another surfaced like mirrors wiped clean, revealing a truth I already knew, yet still hurt to see. Vanessa pushed Lucas to cut all contact with me. Vanessa fabricated prenatal visits. Vanessa bought fake ultrasound images online. Vanessa discussed with friends how to pressure Lucas into demanding the house. Vanessa called me an old obstacle. And worst of all, Vanessa promised Lucas, when you have the house in your name, you'll be the owner. I'll take care of everything else. I clenched my fists, feeling like someone had shoved me off a cliff and caught me right before I hit the ground. Grant looked at me seriously. Eleanor, this is gold-level evidence. I inhaled. I want these messages sent straight to Lucas's phone, but not immediately. Mr. Cal nodded. You want a timer? Yes. For when? Right when the ceremony begins, I said. When Lucas and Vanessa are standing before everyone. When no one can take back their words. When no one can run from the truth. Mr. Cal started setting it up. Messages sent from Lucas's own iCloud to Lucas's own phone. Messages that cannot be deleted before viewing, locked on the screen until opened. I chose 4 items. The entire conversation where Vanessa admits she is not actually pregnant. Photos of Vanessa with the gym trainer. Evidence of her debt and her plan to seize assets. A recording of her calling Lucas. Easy to control. I set the time. 2:40 p.m. The exact moment of the marriage vows. Everything exactly as Grant wanted. A strike that cannot be dodged, cannot be edited, cannot be erased. When it was done, Mr. Cal closed the laptop. The switch is flipped, he said. The clock will take care of the rest. I stood, thanked them both, and left the office. I knew I had crossed a line I could never step back from, but I also knew if I didn't move forward, Vanessa would crush Lucas's life and mine. The wedding day arrived. The Portland sky was gray and cold, the wind curling under my collar and raising goosebumps along my skin. I chose my best dress, the navy gown Richard gave me on our 18th anniversary. I draped a silk scarf over my shoulders, added a touch of lipstick, smoothed my hair, not to impress anyone, but to walk into battle with my head held high. When I reached the church, I immediately felt the disapproval radiating from Vanessa's family. They looked at me like a defective decoration someone had mistakenly included in their perfect tableau. Vanessa stood near the entrance. When she saw me, she smiled, but the smile was sharp as a pin. "Oh, Mrs. Eleanor, you made it after all," I answered softly. "I always keep my word. Hope you know where your seat is," Vanessa said, glancing at her mother. Not everyone is a main character. I didn't reply. I simply looked at her for one brief second, a second long enough for her to realize I was no longer the trembling mother she used to strike at so easily. Lucas walked over. His eyes were uneasy but cold, like someone balancing precariously between two worlds. "Mom, please don't do anything to upset Vanessa, okay?" I placed a hand on his arm. "No, sweetheart, I don't need to do anything." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I gave a small, subtle smile, like one of the lessons Richard used to teach me. Not every truth requires words. Sometimes a well-timed look is enough. I tilted my head slightly and whispered, "Check your phone, son." Lucas squinted, confused, but Vanessa, her face drained of color instantly. I left the church before the ceremony began. I didn't want to stand there. I didn't need to witness the moment everything collapsed. I returned home, hung my scarf, turned on the kettle, and sat in the armchair by the window, the one Richard always loved. 2:39 p.m. The clock hand crept forward. 2:40 p.m. The distant church bells rang, and I knew. Right at that moment, Lucas's phone was vibrating in rapid bursts. Right at that moment, the truth was breaking open in front of my son's eyes. Right at that moment, Vanessa Hale was losing everything she'd carefully constructed. I set my teacup down, folded my hands, and whispered softly, "Richard, now watch how we protect our family." 2:40 p.m. The moment I had waited weeks for, not with gloating, but with a strange sense of calm, was unfolding somewhere just a few blocks away. I wasn't there, but from what guests later told me, combined with what I imagined from the messages delivered right on schedule, the entire wedding scene formed sharply in my mind, vivid enough that I could almost hear Lucas's breath falter when he saw his phone screen. When the church bells began, Lucas stood beside Vanessa at the altar, hands loosely holding her bouquet, his face tense with nerves mixed with exhaustion. Vanessa looked more radiant than ever. Her white gown fitted perfectly, a long veil cascading behind her, her smile triumphant, deeper than usual because she believed everything had fallen into place, until Lucas's phone buzzed in his pocket. Once, then 3 times, then continuously, like frantic warnings from a failing heartbeat. At first, Lucas ignored it. The officiant began the opening words, but the phone buzzed again, longer, stronger. Guests turned to look. Vanessa shot Lucas a sharp glance, tightening her jaw but keeping her smile fixed for the cameras. "Turn it off," she hissed through her teeth. "It's rude." But something in Lucas, some buried instinct, told him to look. He reached into his pocket and glanced at the screen. A message from himself, from his own iCloud account. "Lucas, look at this." He frowned and opened it. And in the next second, Lucas's knees nearly gave out. Video 1, Vanessa removing the fake pregnancy belly. The screen faded from black into a clear image of Vanessa in the gym restroom. She turned in front of the mirror, then used both hands to peel off a thin silicone layer from her stomach, rolled it up, and tossed it into her bag. On the mirror, her reflection showed a smirk, smug, satisfied, nothing like the gentle persona she showed Lucas. At the ceremony, Lucas froze. His chest rose and fell rapidly. His hands shook so violently the phone almost slipped. Guests whispered, "What's wrong with him? What's on the phone? Is the bride turning pale?" Seeing Lucas's face drain of color, Vanessa rushed closer, tugging on his sleeve. "Lucas, what's wrong? You're scaring me." But before Lucas could answer, the second message popped up. Audio. Vanessa plotting to have me declared incompetent to seize my assets. A short recording, one I had listened to many times before, deciding to send it. Vanessa's voice, cold as ice. "If his mom won't sign, we'll prove she's mentally unfit. A doctor only needs to check a few boxes. Once the house is transferred, he's the legal owner. That's it." Then another woman's voice. "And the baby?" Vanessa's dry laugh. "We won't need it anymore. I just want the house and the Harrington name." The moment Vanessa's laugh echoed through the audio in the church, it was as if someone had punched Lucas straight in the chest. No, no way, Lucas stammered. Vanessa tried to touch his arm. Lucas jerked her hand away. Guests began standing up, lifting their phones, recording everything. Another message came in. Lucas opened it and was so stunned he nearly dropped his phone. Photos. Vanessa cheating with the gym trainer. Images from different days. Them holding hands, hugging, even walking into a hotel room together. Vanessa screamed, her voice sharper than every echo in the church. That's photoshopped. Someone wants to ruin our happy day. Lucas, you have to believe me. But Lucas could no longer stand firmly. Everything he had believed for the past year was collapsing into pieces right before his eyes. Then the final message popped up. Debt and fraud evidence. A long list. All the debts. All the past scams. All the plans to drain Lucas financially. All the ways she mocked him for being easy to control. Vanessa lunged forward to snatch the phone, but Lucas stepped back just in time. His face turned ghostly pale. Vanessa, Lucas said, his voice trembling and broken. You're not pregnant. The words cracked through the church like thunder. The entire room fell silent, then erupted into chaos. Guests whispered loudly, some covering their mouths, some zooming their phones toward the bride, some calling others over to look. Vanessa shrieked, "No, it's not like that. You're being tricked. Someone edited. But why does everything match?" Lucas shouted, losing control for the first time in his life. His voice split the air, raw with the deepest betrayal a man could experience. Every head in the room turned toward the bride. Vanessa pretended to cry, collapsing to her knees and covering her face. But no one believed those tears. It looked like an amateur performance, forced, hollow, desperate. At that moment, a guest rushed forward to steady Lucas, who looked like he might fall. Another dragged Vanessa back as she began thrashing and screaming. "No, you have to believe me. None of this is real. Your mother ruined us." Lucas stared straight at her, eyes bloodshot but unwavering. "I have nothing left to believe." Then he turned and ran out of the wedding. No one reacted fast enough. No one chased him. Only Vanessa remained, surrounded by cameras, whispers, and the ruins of the future she never imagined would collapse. Lucas ran across the parking lot, yanked open his car door, started the engine, and sped off like a man with no bearings. But the heart always knows its way home, and the road Lucas chose was not to Vanessa's house, not to the reception hall, not to the luxury apartment they rented for their happy family photos. It was to my home. While I sat in the living room, my hand resting on a cup of tea gone cold, watching the clock tick to minute 41, the screech of brakes rang out on my porch, then frantic footsteps, then a pounding on the door, not knocking but hammering, as if the hand doing it was shaking with pain and despair. Mom, open the door," Lucas's voice. The voice of the son I thought I had lost forever. I stood, opened the door, and Lucas collapsed at my feet, eyes red, still clutching the phone filled with the messages I had delivered into his life at exactly 2:40 p.m. "Mom, I'm sorry." I looked down at my grown son, broken, crumbling, on the same doorstep where Richard had once carried him inside for the first time when he could barely walk. In that moment, I understood one thing clearly. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I wasn't fighting alone. Lucas fell to his knees on my porch, as if his legs could no longer support the weight of the truth and the shame crushing his heart. Snow speckled the shoulders of his suit jacket, his breath shivering in the cold Portland air. But it wasn't the weather making him shake. It was everything he had just watched come apart at the wedding. "Mom," Lucas choked out, gripping the door frame like it was the only solid thing left in his life. "Mom, I'm so sorry." I looked at my grown son kneeling there, eyes bloodshot, and in that moment, every wall I had built to protect myself these past months seemed to crumble. I didn't see a man who had turned his back on his mother. I saw the little boy I used to carry, the boy whose tears I once wiped away, the boy I held close when he stumbled for the first time. I knelt in front of him and placed my hand on his cheek. His skin was hot with tears, his eyes filled with panic, begging for one simple thing, so simple it made my chest tighten. "Please tell me you're still here." I pulled him into my arms, held him tightly as if I could pull him back from the edge Vanessa had pushed him toward. "My son," I whispered, "I never left." Lucas pressed his face into my shoulder, sobs shaking through him in waves. His whole body trembled like a child abandoned for too long who had finally found shelter. I helped him inside, made hot tea, draped a towel over his shoulders. He sat frozen for a long time, hands covering his face, eyes hollow as if trying to piece together the fragments of a life shattered in front of an entire room of people. "Mom," Lucas finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you let me turn against you like that?" I set the cup down. "Because if I had told you, you wouldn't have believed me. You were trapped inside the reality Vanessa built. Only when you saw it with your own eyes could you step out." Lucas nodded weakly, tears falling again. "I was so stupid. I let someone like her control my mind. I hurt you. You were a victim," I said softly. "Not a villain." He pressed his face into my palm, a gesture he used to make as a child whenever he woke from a nightmare. When he finally calmed, I took him to the living room and brought out the file Richard had left behind, the one I had never shown Lucas because I promised Richard I would wait until our son became a man in his own right. "Why did Dad want to keep this a secret?" Lucas asked as I set the file on the table. "Because your father wanted you to be strong enough before taking responsibility," I said. "He believed in you, even if he didn't live long enough to see it." I opened the folder, the transfer documents for the factory, the investments, the shares, the final amended will. Everything had Lucas's name on it, along with one condition: he could only inherit when free from anyone's influence outside the family. When Lucas read that line, his lips pressed together and trembled. "I almost lost everything because of a few sweet words from her," he whispered. "You weren't wrong, Lucas," I reassured him. "People like Vanessa build walls out of compliments, cages out of fake affection, and chains out of guilt. She knew you valued family, so she turned family into a weapon against you." Lucas dropped his head into his hands, shoulders falling as he finally understood the painful but freeing truth. I was manipulated. A few days later, Lucas went to see a therapist on his own. I didn't push him. I only asked, "Do you want someone to talk to?" He answered immediately, "Yes, I don't want to be the man I became this past year." I watched him walk into the clinic, shoulders straight, step steady. He had recognized his wound, and those who recognize their wounds always have a chance to heal. One afternoon, Lucas came back with a calmer expression. He placed a new folder on the table. "Mom, I want to run the factory with you, and I want to do it for Dad and for myself, not to prove anything to anyone." I looked at my son, the son I feared I had lost to Vanessa, standing before me with clear eyes for the first time in years. "Your father would be so proud," I said, and I meant it with all my heart. And then, strangely, after months of darkness, I felt light finally slipping back through the cracks inside me. The police soon opened an investigation into Vanessa. From messages, financial evidence, recordings, videos, everything exposed fraud, deception, attempted asset seizure, and violations of several legal statutes. When the news spread, her former victims came forward too. People she had scammed with false romantic promises, clients she misled while posing as an influencer. I didn't rejoice at seeing someone dragged into the light so brutally, but I didn't pity her either. Some people only stop when they are stopped. The night the police took Vanessa in for questioning, Lucas stood beside me at the window, watching the patrol car turn the corner. He said nothing, but he placed his hand over mine, warm, steady. "Mom," he said quietly, "thank you for saving me." I smiled. "No, sweetheart, you saved yourself. I only handed you the lantern." In the weeks that followed, our lives slowly settled into a new rhythm. We ate breakfast together. Each morning, planned improvements for the factory, shared stories about Richard. Every afternoon, Lucas spent an hour in therapy, returning lighter each time. One evening, he sat beside me and said, "Mom, I know I can't erase what I did, but I promise you, I'll never abandon you like that again." I cupped his cheek. "Love doesn't need to be perfect, Lucas. It just needs to be real." The house warmed again. No more heavy silence. No more nights spent alone with a loneliness so deep I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my chest. I began to see real light again, the light of hope, healing, and a family finding its way through the storm. But even as our lives rebuilt themselves, out there was a woman whose darkness did not surrender easily. As I closed my office door to head to bed, my phone buzzed with a new message. "Don't think this is over, Mrs. Harrington." No name, no number, no profile picture. But I recognized that tone instantly. Vanessa Hale wasn't done. That anonymous message that night made me stand still for a while, as if those disembodied words carried a cold draft that slid down my spine. But unlike the early months of fear, this time I didn't tremble, didn't drop my phone, and didn't sit for hours questioning what I had done wrong. I simply looked at the screen for 3 seconds, then set the phone down on the table. I had come too far to fear Vanessa Hale ever again. A few days later, everything began shifting in ways none of us expected. The police called Lucas in to provide more testimony. The evidence I had submitted, combined with statements from her past victims, opened an official investigation, not into Lucas, into Vanessa. The day Vanessa was arrested, I was watering the garden in the backyard. Lucas burst in through the gate, panting as if he had run all the way. "Mom, they arrested her. Vanessa is really under arrest." I set the watering can down and looked at my son. Morning light fell across his face, the kind of light I hadn't seen there in many years, a light of liberation. "Are you sure?" I asked. Lucas nodded repeatedly. "There's video. People are posting it everywhere. She was handcuffed in front of her apartment, Mom. The police listed so many charges: financial fraud, falsifying documents, identity fraud, even conspiracy to seize assets from someone deemed incapacitated." I understood. I didn't feel joy, but somewhere deep inside, a part of me finally exhaled because my son was finally free from the toxic net Vanessa had thrown over him. Lucas sat beside me on the steps, his arms wrapped around his knees, sighing heavily. "Mom, how could I have been so blind? How did I let her drag me that far?" I placed my hand on his shoulder. "You weren't weak. You were longing to be loved. And Vanessa knew exactly how to exploit that. But now I want to be different," Lucas said, his voice steadier. "I want to rebuild my life from the ground up." I looked at him, the grown man who had once lost his path, now finding it again. And for the first time in years, I saw Richard in his eyes, calm, thoughtful, someone who faced consequences instead of running from them. In the months that followed, Lucas spent most of his days at the factory. He learned to read reports, to manage staff, to stand before a team and make decisions. Some evenings, he came to my house with stacks of documents, drinking tea while asking me questions one by one. How would Dad have handled this? Did you ever do this back then? Am I going in the right direction? I watched my son grow up a second time, not into an adult, but into a man with real strength. One afternoon, Lucas stopped by Richard's factory to check the production line, and there he met Grace Miller. I didn't hear her name from Lucas first, but from an older worker who had once been very close to Richard. "That Grace girl," she said when I visited the factory. "She's truly kind. When Lucas was still hurting, she kept her distance. When he started getting better, she began talking to him. That woman knows boundaries." I only smiled, but something in my heart softened. Unlike Vanessa, who rushed in fast, strong, and cut into Lucas's emptiness to fill it with control, Grace appeared as someone who simply walked beside him. Not ahead, not over him, just beside him. She was 37 with 2 little daughters, Emma and Lily, 2 curly-haired angels who toddled around the factory yard each afternoon while their mother worked overtime. Grace wasn't dazzlingly beautiful or flashy, but she had eyes that listened and a smile shaped by loss, making her cherish every small thing. When I met her in the conference room for the first time, Grace immediately stood up. "Hello, Mrs. Eleanor. I've heard a lot about you," I asked, half teasing. "All good things, I hope?" Grace laughed. "Yes, all things that make me want to learn from you." There wasn't a millimeter of pretense in that smile, and to me, that was more precious than any compliment. From that day, Lucas and Grace talked more, not with the urgency of people clinging to each other out of fear, but with the slow steadiness of 2 people building something real from the ground up. One evening, Lucas came to my house, taking off his coat as his cheeks reddened. "Mom, I invited Grace and the girls for dinner this weekend, if that's okay." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking me or asking for my blessing?" Lucas laughed. A laugh filled with a lightness I hadn't heard since long before Vanessa. That dinner became one of the happiest evenings of my life. Emma ran around my living room, touching everything, then turning to me. "Grandma, whose is this?" I laughed. "Your temporary Grandpa Richard's." Everyone burst out laughing. Lily climbed into my lap after dessert as naturally as if I had always been part of her life. "Grandma Eleanor, tell a story," she said, eyes sparkling. I looked at Lucas. He smiled and nodded. So I told them stories about Richard, stories Lucas had heard 100 times, but listened to again that night as if hearing them new. At one moment, Lucas's eyes met Grace's, and I understood that my family was slowly filling back up with a love that wasn't loud but steady. In the months that followed, my house was no longer a quiet, shadowy place. It was full of children's laughter, the sound of dishes clinking at dinner, and the soft music Richard loved at the end of the day. Lucas cared for Emma and Lily as if they were two little stars hung back into a sky that had once gone dark. I became Grandma Eleanor to the girls, a name that warmed my heart. I wasn't their grandmother by blood, but family, I realized, has never been defined solely by blood. It is defined by choice, by who we open our hearts to. One evening, Lucas leaned against the kitchen doorway as I washed dishes. Arms crossed, he smiled. "Mom, lately when I look in the mirror, I see Dad." I paused. "In what way?" "In the way he said, a man becomes grown when he knows how to protect, not control. When he knows how to repent, not blame. When he knows how to stay instead of run." I stood still for a moment. I saw Richard in that sentence. I saw him standing behind Lucas, placing a hand on his shoulder as if he had been waiting a long time for Lucas to return. "Your father is very proud," I whispered. Lucas stepped forward and hugged me from behind, just like when he was a tall, lanky boy who still loved to press his face against my shoulder. "And you pulled me out of the darkest place. I owe you my life." I turned and hugged him. "You owe me nothing. Just live well." And Lucas was living better than ever. As for Vanessa, weeks later she appeared on the evening news. Head down, hair messy, a loose coat barely covering the handcuffs on her wrists. The anchor listed her charges: credit fraud, falsifying documents, identity scams, intentional exploitation of the elderly. I didn't smile. I didn't look away. I simply watched, then turned off the TV. Some chapters must be closed before new ones can begin. When everything settled, when the factory became stronger under Lucas's leadership, when Grace and the girls became warm, familiar presences at every dinner, when my once empty home filled with laughter again, I knew I had reached the end of a very long journey, a journey of loss, betrayal, pain, and rebirth. One afternoon, I sat alone in my study. The late sunlight touched the cover of my old wedding album. I placed my hand on it and closed my eyes. Richard, I kept my promise. I protected him. Outside the door came Emma and Lily's voices calling each other, Lucas's laughter following close behind. I got up and opened the door, watching my new family spill through the hallway. Family isn't always blood. Family is who remains when the storm passes. And I knew it was time to close that painful chapter, a chapter full of tears, but also full of strength. I stepped out of the room and joined the laughter outside. A new chapter was beginning. 2 years passed faster than I expected. The light in my life no longer flickered like those stormy days. It stood steady, warm, shining patiently over the small home where Lucas and I found each other again. Every morning I saw a familiar sight on the porch. Lucas driving Richard's old pickup truck out of the gate, carrying the lunch Grace made for him. And every evening he returned to the sound of Emma and Lily running across the yard to greet him. The factory thrived under Lucas's leadership. He introduced improvements, expanded contracts, rebuilt the office wing. Most importantly, he worked with humility, attentiveness, and determination, the very qualities I once feared he had lost during his time with Vanessa. But now, watching him step into life with a steady stride, I understood that sometimes people must walk through a dark forest to recognize the value of sunlight. One spring afternoon, I brought a fresh apple pie to Lucas's office. The smell of cinnamon and warm butter reminded me sharply of Richard. He used to bring pies like this to workers whenever the factory hit an important milestone. Lucas opened the door, his eyes lighting up. "Mom, you really baked this for me." "Of course," I said, setting the pie on the desk. "Your father used to do the same. I'm only continuing the tradition." Lucas fell silent for a moment, then pulled me into a hug. Not the desperate, collapsing hug from that shattered wedding day, but the peaceful embrace of a son who had found his true home again. "Thank you, Mom," he murmured. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I hurt you so much." I stroked his back gently, unwilling to reopen old wounds. "That's what your father wanted, and what I wanted. You came back. That's all that matters." Some nights later, during a light drizzle, I sat down at my old computer to clean up my photo library. I froze when I opened a folder I never wanted to see again. Vanessa. Dozens of photos appeared. Her practice smiles, her lavish parties, her empty promises. I looked at them one by one, as though seeing ghosts of myself in the years I had been fragile. Without hesitation, I hit delete. As the trash icon spun, it felt as though someone lifted a stone off my chest. No more images of the woman who nearly destroyed my family. No more remnants for old pain to cling to. Only peace remained. I returned to my desk, opened the journal I had kept during the darkest months, and wrote a final line, a truth my heart had taken years to comprehend. I am not a victim. I am a fortress. It was true. I didn't collapse when pushed out of my son's life. I didn't disappear when slandered. I didn't break when loneliness filled every room. I stood up, fought, protected, and reclaimed the light. Lucas, Grace, Emma, and Lily were the greatest gift life returned to me after everything I had lost. We shared dinner together every night. Lucas grilling meat, Grace making salad, the girls running circles around the yard, and me sitting back, grateful for every second. I still believed Richard was watching us from somewhere. I felt his warmth whenever Lucas laughed in that voice so much like his father's. I saw him in the way Lucas placed his hand gently but firmly on the girl's shoulders. Richard was smiling, I knew it. Smiling, proud, and relieved that our family had found its way home. One weekend dinner, we sat around the old wooden table Richard built by hand. The smell of grilled food, the children's giggles, the soft yellow light. It was all so perfect. I paused for a moment just to etch it into my heart. "Grandma Eleanor, tell a story." Emma climbed into my lap. I stroked her hair and began telling a story, my voice slow and full of the breath of happiness. It felt like closing a chapter, not with sorrow, but with completeness. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If my journey reminded you of a pain you once carried or a hope you're still holding, I would love to know where you're listening from. A small town, a distant state, or a quiet corner of the world. Please share your voice with me in the comments. If this story brought you strength, please like, subscribe, and join me for the next journeys. Every view and every shared moment from you is what allows me to keep telling stories for hearts that have weathered many storms. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for your companionship. Thank you for the warmth you bring to this place. I wish you peace and the quiet strength you've always had.